Hey, so every summer I go through this thing emotionally where it's this like, okay, Lord, we made it another year. That'd be neat if we did that again. And that seems to mean more this year than most. So whether you've been here for 12 years or this is your first Sunday, whether you're in the room or you're online, whether you're in Helena or you're somewhere else, it's important to me to be able to say, we're so excited for this 12th year. Our fiscal year starts in September, but also just our calendar. We really have always started in September. And there's a lot on the docket that we're pretty excited about. We've got some ideas around Halloween weekend that we're excited about, and Christmas Eve. We think that we'll do about 80 different gatherings in the Grand Street, socially distanced. So lots coming down the pipeline. What I want to do this month, though, is, one of the things that many of us have returned to, or the staff in particular have really returned to in earnest over this last 6 months, is just the getting one-on-one with people and going for walks and talking with people. And both as I've reflected on myself and as I've just listened to you all, there's been a particular theme that's emerged from all of this that I think actually there's remarkable opportunity in, and so that's where we're going to go for the next few weeks. One of the things that you may or may not know about me is I'm not a car guy. Sorry, guys, but my wife likes cars. And I'm not a gun guy. Don't own one, but my father-in-law has lots of guns. And I'm not really a climber, adrenaline junkie. My wife is, though. But what I like is I like plants. Just saying. So you may not know that, but I've always kind of liked them, especially bonsai trees. They're just the best. And I listen to these nerdy podcasts about these professionals who've apprenticed in Japan for 6 years, and now they have these expensive bonsai nurseries in places like Nashville and Portland where you can grow things. And the hilarious thing to me is they always ask them this one question, like, hey, so where'd you get your start? And where do you suppose their interest started? Almost all of them, like at least 3/4 of them. Those of you raised in the 80s. Mr. Miyagi. It's Karate Kid, almost all of them. And that's definitely it for me. So I've always liked them, but I've always lived in dark, dreary places where you couldn't grow them, and then was just not at a season of life where I could enjoy them. Well, my wife had this vision for our patio a couple of years ago, and now we have places where things grow, and then we have this sunroom in our house that we finished. So now one of my favorite things has been, especially when you go somewhere else, to find some nerdy kind of nursery and look at the cool plants, like not the garden variety Albertsons plants, but there's this great nursery in Anaconda. Next time you go there, it's such a fun place to visit. But there's this, the Steve Wong of plants is in Anaconda. He's got this crazy cool nursery with all these weird, wacky, succulent plants. Love going there. There's a place in Billings. Every time I go to Billings, I go to the Ganans nursery. Last summer, when you could travel, we went to Fort Collins and found this really neat nursery there. In February, I was in Florida, South Florida, with JR, stayed with some friends, and we found this. What's it called? Dragon Tree Bonsai. If I ever go back there, I'm spending a full day just there. But one of the things that I've learned, and probably many of you already knew this, but I've learned it the hard way, is when you take a plant, especially from a nursery, especially from South Florida, and you bring it to our high desert region and stick it on your coffee table where there is no sunlight and the humidity is negative 30%, it's stressful. It's hard on plants. I didn't know that. I should have known that. And then the other thing that I've learned that adds stress is when you take it out of its native pot and you put it in something new, that adds more stress. So I'd always get these plants home and be like, this is cool. And then, because my wife likes to do crazy things and I like to interior decorate, I guess, and I'd be like, I'm going to put this on the coffee table, but there's no sun there. So I'd put it in this new pot, and then the thing would die. So I've learned that the hard way. This would be an example. In case I hadn't already ruined my respect enough, I brought a plant with me. So this thing, it's a succulent. I bought it in Fort Collins last summer. This is the one that I bought. When I bought it, the main succulent flower, I guess you would call it, or plant, was bigger than this. I got it home, I bought a pot, I shoved it in it, and then over the next 2 months, I just watched leaf after leaf turn yellow and die, turn yellow and die. And by around Christmas, what was left was no bigger than a quarter. I was convinced it was toast. I took it into the office. I don't even know why I took it to the office. Well, part of it was because I knew that I have better sunlight in the office. So I took it in the office. I set it on this corner of my desk. I was kind of pouting, so I stopped watering it. And now you can see it. And what stands out to me, and this is going to have a purpose in a second, is it looks nothing like what it did in 2019 when I bought it. And in many ways, the win of this plant when I bought it is nothing. I lost. But something has emerged. In fact, now when I count it, there's 7, I think, plants growing here. And I've nerded out because you can't grow Mr. Miyagi-style bonsai trees in Helena very well, but you can do succulent bonsai trees. And this thing, about the time I die, is going to be one cool bonsai tree. But I guess here's what's been rattling around in my guts and what I want to explore here this next few weeks is I think in some ways this is COVID. That I've met with so many business leaders and managers. I was talking with a friend, Brian, who does a lot of our art a couple weeks ago, and he's like, Adam, I feel like I'm watching my business die before my eyes. And in his case, it had nothing to do with a lack of work. It just had everything to do with the joy of the work, the type of the work, and in particular, the challenges of homeschooling his daughter while also trying to be creative and energized to lead his business. Some of you, maybe this is your routine or your recreation. I think our kids are the untold story here. Like, we're all as adults grieving and talking about how much our lives have changed, but imagine them. So I think in one sense, COVID is that thing where, like, things have died that we really valued, that we really liked. Events have died, and activities have died, and ways of socializing have died. And I know that one of the most unempathetic things you can do is say to someone who's suffering, like, hey, but here's this good thing. But I do feel like we're moving into this time where we've got to move beyond the like, yeah, but when the other shoe drops, when the next shoe drops, and begin to go, okay, what do we have? Because what I'm hearing in my conversations with you and what I'm seeing when I look at things like Narrate is a lot like that plant, where suddenly I'm holding something that's alive and it's vibrant and I can see a future for it. I'm hopeful about it, and it looks way different than it did in 2019. And I wonder if part of the season that we're in is grieving what's lost, but stewarding what's new. And what I want to do in this next few weeks is ask this one question. And I'm going to come at this from a few different angles, so if you don't like the question, then we'll see in October. But it's really this question of, what if the happiest people you know do things tired with other people? There's a family from around here that's their family motto, do things tired. And I think what they're pushing against is when we get home from work at 5 o'clock, we're all tired. We all want to binge watch Netflix. When we get to the weekend, we're all tired. We all want to fill our cart at the brewery and then just check out for 2 days. But what they've learned, and this is kind of where I want to push all of us, is what if part of the opportunity of this season is that connection matters? And that connection, you know, we would all agree that food, water, shelter, like those are non-negotiables. I wonder, and this is what I'm feeling, and I've heard it from so many of you, that the opportunity of this season is to recognize, what if connecting with others is also a non-negotiable? And I hope that's not me playing fast and loose with COVID or social distancing or masks. That's really not my agenda. I'm not trying to say that I think this is all a conspiracy, but I guess I am trying to push a little bit and go, at what point do we say, wait a minute? I take certain risks I have to eat and I go to the grocery store, and I take certain risks I have to pay my mortgage and I go to work, and therefore, and I'm not arguing for Sunday morning. That's really not my agenda. But at what point do we have to go, wait a minute, connecting with people matters. And in many ways, it's not like I'm going to connect with people like I did before. It's COVID exposed. That wasn't really the win before, but maybe that really is the win. You know, it was over 20 years ago that I met a guy named Fred. You hear me reference him often. He was 20 years my senior. He sold insurance. He set aside a couple half-hour chunks in his day to go for walks with people and talk about Jesus because he was really good at it. I met him in a crisis at 19. And let me just say, before I talk too much about that, because I think this speaks to it as well, I think I've not done a good job in the past of saying, I don't see my need and my relationship with Fred as born out of any kind of failure on the part of my parents or my family or anything. I'm grateful for my parents and my family. I think they set me up very, very well. I think what I didn't know until I met Fred, but I'm watching this play itself out with my boys and some of their relationships, and I watched it as a youth pastor for years, and now I think I'm seeing it in all of you when we go for walks and things, is that if your family is limited to those with whom you share blood relation, like that's not generally very healthy. Dr. Townsend, who we'll talk about a little bit, this highly respected Christian psychologist, he says, if your family of origin is your family of God, then your family of God's unhealthy. And he's not suggesting that family's not important or valuable. He is suggesting that if where we get our community, if the only people we would call when we had a flat tire was someone with whom we share blood relations, then that's not a great sign. I don't think I knew that before I met Fred. I met him at 19 in a crisis. He said to me when we met, like, hey, we should get together sometime. I'm a 19-year-old kid. I'm like, yeah, whatever. That is a weird statement you just made. And there's no doubt in my mind I would have never acted on it. I went back to my life, and I was working for Coca-Cola, and 2 or 3 weeks in, my phone rang. I remember it was a yellow Nokia that was like this long, and the antenna came out, and that was like the coolest thing about it. And I think the buttons, they had a glow to them. He called, and he said, hey, would you want to come to my house for lunch on Saturday? It was one of the weirdest phone calls I've ever received, because it's so foreign. Like, I don't think I'd ever gone to lunch at anybody's house that wasn't my family. Desperate times call for desperate measures. I said yes. I showed up at his house on a Saturday afternoon. I remember he lived back behind Softies and Billings. And we sat down for lunch at his dinner table, and like the invitation was weird, and lunch was even more weird. We ate soup that his wife fed us over his kitchen table. I'm 19, he's probably 45. We sat there and talked about Jesus. It was incredibly strange. And you hear me quote him all the time, but I think what this season, part of what I'm realizing I learned from Fred was not just what I learned explicitly, not just what he taught me, but just the value of doing life with people. What other cultures have called hospitality. I remember being in Israel 10 years ago, and the Bedouins, like, you show up and suddenly they would feed you their Christmas dinner, so to speak. You're a guest. I think what Fred taught me, he used to always say, I'd say, Fred, when I was a new youth pastor, Fred, how do I do this? And he would say, Adam, if you're passionate about Jesus, so will they be, and that'll be enough. And this was his thing, just get people's feet under your dinner table. Just have people, and it wasn't like, and then have a grand Bible study, or then change the world through your philosophical teachings. It was just share space with one another. And I wonder if one of the challenges of this time is to begin to reflect on the fact that we probably, in general, have nicer homes than any culture ever before us. We probably have a more robust menu at our disposal than anybody else before us. And I think if we were being honest, generally speaking, we probably have fewer foreigners, so to speak, like non-blood relatives in our homes than any culture ever has. And I wonder, what if the deep yearning and the deep opportunity and the new growth is this desire for connection? See, I think Fred taught me that following Jesus wasn't intended to be done alone. I think Fred's the one that taught me that the quality of your life, this is one of his statements, the quality of your life is always determined by the quality of your relationships. And then he would always say, what comprises a good relationship are kind words and shared experiences. I wonder if this is a season where we step into that. You know, there's a statement in the Bible that the first time I realized this, it was hard on my theology because I'd never thought of it like this. But if you're familiar with the Bible, or if you're not, you probably know of Adam and Eve and the apple and the snake and all that stuff. And there's this classic moment in the narrative where sin happened. But before sin happened, you have a good God saying something was not good. This stands out to me as mattering right now. In Genesis 2, before the apple, before any of the eating, and I know this verse can be kind of a trigger because we'll talk about that in just a second, but listen to Genesis 2:8. This is before sin. Then the Lord said, it is not good that the man should be alone. So here's the narrative. You've got God in a garden and a person, Adam, in a garden. And please don't stumble over, was Adam historical or not? Or what is this saying about gender roles? I really don't think that's what this text is speaking to. Evolution, age of the earth, that's all stuff we impose on the text. What do we have? I think we've got an epic story. An epic story that, just like Jesus is fully God, fully human, I think this story is fully divine and fully human, which means co-authorship, which means there's tricky things that go on there, and there's a story emerging. And in my opinion, the story is about who is God and what is God like, and that culminates in Jesus. We've talked about this, that if the text contradicts Jesus, I'm going with Jesus. But it's also an epic story about what it means to be human. And to the extent that this story was finally compiled in exile, we've explored this since March, these people who suddenly lost everything normal to them, much like you and I, who are suddenly putting their stories together, kind of like, what did Grandma used to say, and what did Grandpa used to say, and what was that thing Uncle Billy used to say, and they're putting the story back together. Isn't it fascinating that before they introduce sin to the story, they start with this basic premise, and that is, doing life just you and God is not good. That we're intended to do it together. And again, I'm not suggesting that has to look the same for all of us. But what if that's the season? I was meeting with a friend recently, and he said, man, I feel like we were in this season where it was about acquiring stuff, and suddenly none of it matters. What's left? Maybe it's relationship. John Townsend, who I referenced, and if you're familiar with him, it's probably because you read his book, Boundaries, a great book that he co-authored with a guy named Henry Cloud. His most recent book that I read, I think it was pre-COVID, it's a book called People Fuel, and John Townsend is now a pretty reputable executive consultant. He commands tens of thousands of dollars to go spend a day or three with a Fortune 500 type company and working them through, like, how do you get to that next level? And the book it's kind of worth the read, if I can say that. The opening story to me was the gold of the book, and it's really what fueled the book. He tells a story of sitting with this executive group of women and men, presumably at some kind of Fortune 500 place, presumably something where he's commanding something like 50 grand a day or something crazy like that. And he gets them all in a boardroom, and he says, okay, what do you need to be successful? And he's got a marker or a whiteboard behind him and a marker in hand, and they, as you would imagine, a bunch of Harvard grads and things like that, they fill the whiteboard. Market share and market penetration and good resource and a good culture and a good product. They just keep going. And then they get the consultant look, that's like, oh, you didn't say it yet. And so that patronizing, like, okay, what else? And finally they could tell that they still weren't hitting what he was after. And they're like, come on, just tell us. And he turned around on the board and he just wrote on the board these 4 words: you need to need. And they got mad. They're like, we just told you everything we need. We know we need to need. And he said, okay, here's the deal. He said, in life, we have functional needs individually, food, water, shelter, those types of things. Corporately, you've got a great list here, he said. You could teach an MBA from your list right here alone. He said, but here's where I want to spend my time with you for these next couple days. And that's this, that we don't just have functional needs, but we have relational needs. And here's where he really turned it on him. He said, looking at you, what I know about you without knowing you very well is in a room like this of high-functioning leaders, and I think what was true of that room is just as true of this community we call Narrate. Here's what I know about you. You're really, really good at being needed. People need you. You're the people that people call when they have a flat tire or a problem to be solved or a favor to be asked. You're the ones that they call. You love. So that's why you're the boss. That's why you're in charge. That's why you're at the top of the food chain. You've mastered being needed. But the difference, he said, between those who do this for the long haul and those who thrive and those who avoid burnout and those who avoid illicit kind of behavior that leads to all kinds of fallout and crash and sabotage and self-sabotage, he said, here's probably what you're not good at, and here's where we're going to spend our time. You need to need. You're good at being needed. You're probably horrible at acknowledging your need to need others. And that, he said, not your intelligence, not your creativity, that will be your undoing. Now, to whatever extent that's true, I wonder if it's true for you. And I wonder if part of what COVID's exposing is, I'm not alone to the extent that I have a business, but I'm alone. And here's, to me, the great news. The narrative of the text, it's full of permission to need. And we're all afraid of being that needy person, and obviously we don't want to push the pendulum too far, but think of Moses, like the great leader. Exodus 3 and 4, a couple of my favorite chapters in the whole Bible. Think of the way we tell the story. Moses in the desert, burning bush, God calls. Moses is like, I can't, I'm too big of a wuss. God says, it's not about you, it's about me. Moses triumphantly walks into Egypt and says, let's go, we're going to do this. Us and God, me and God together, we're going to lead these people out, and he does. I just realized in thinking through all of this and studying for this, I myself, though I would have said since I was 19 years old, Exodus 3 was one of the stories that changed the direction of my life. Listen to how Exodus 4 ends. The Lord said to Aaron, go into the wilderness to meet Moses. So he went, and he met him at the mountain of God and kissed him. Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord with which he had sent him and all the signs with which he had charged him. Then Moses and Aaron went and assembled all the elders of the Israelites. And even that's not the full story. We get Miriam, his sisters, also involved. And sure, they're blood relatives, but what if this permission to need is universal? Think of Jesus, the idealized human. We love the story of John 4 and the woman at the well and Jesus who gives this woman incredible dignity in the midst of all kinds of scandal. We miss all too easily, what prompted the whole interaction? It's like Jesus was hiking with his friends, and he reached a point where he's like, I'm tired, I'm hungry, and I'm thirsty. I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to sit down, and you guys are going to go the next 4 miles, go get me some food and bring it back. I mean, this is the Son of God. This is the King who's going, I have needs, and I need to say out loud to you right now, other humans, I need you to meet them. Or think of the garden. I mean, this, I think, also captures perhaps why we're so afraid to say we need to need. Jesus, it's not clear to me when he finally understood that the cross was imminent. I don't buy that he came out of the chute believing the cross was imminent. But all the same, at some point he did, and he says to a couple of his closest friends, I'm going to go into the olive grove and I'm going to pray my guts out, almost literally. Would you please come with me and pray with me? And they fall asleep. And he has the audacity to point out to them, like, I needed you and you didn't show up. I'm going to give you another chance. I wonder if in this is not only the confirmation that we need to need, but also the vulnerability and the fear of why we don't, because we hurt each other. We let each other down. We don't return calls. We don't do things that we know we ought to do. And that's, in some sense, okay when we just acknowledge, like, yeah, I'm glad to be needed by you, and I will fail you. What if needing to need really is the story? And one of the things that Townsend said in this business interaction was, at one point he caught somebody mid-sentence about to say, like, I have that person. It's called my wife. It's called my husband. And Townsend you can read the book if you want to kind of further understand what he's saying, but he said, listen, here's what I know, is if the only person that it's okay for you to need is your spouse, then not only is your marriage in trouble, so is your leadership future. What if we need? And what if that's okay? And what if this is a season where we're being reminded that really does matter? We're going to explore some of that more next week. There's a guy named Joseph Meyer, and I think he nuances it a little bit differently, and for me, a way that's helpful. We've talked about Joseph Meyer before. He wrote a book called In Search to Belong. It's based upon some psychological, or sociological, rather, data that you can read the book and see. But his argument is, if we're not careful, we assume that all of our relational needs are met by intimate relationships, which isn't a sexual thing. It's, of course, a connection thing. And he says if we're not careful, what we do is we assume that good Christians channel all relationships to that intimate sector. His argument is it's quite possible to be really, really good at needing on the intimate level and really terrible on the social or personal level and still be unfilled. So here's what Joseph Meyer says, is he says there's 4 types of relationships that are essential. What he calls intimate, personal, social, and public. Intimate, his metaphor is you've got access to the archives, like the video archives of your life are fully known. You might say that they know the password to your phone and can watch on your cloud anything and everything about you. Then there's what he calls personal relationships. And personal, I think this is probably where most of our quote-unquote best friends hang out. They have video clips of you. They know you pretty well. They maybe have even seen you at your worst, but still it's a pretty curated vision of yourself, view of you. And then there's what he calls social relationships, and these are people, you know their name. If you see them at Costco, you wave. These are people that maybe, and part of what I love, again, is that they can change spaces. These are people that in another life or in another season were really good friends, but now someone had a baby or something happened and you just kind of went different ways, and that's okay. These social relationships are ones, these are the people you see at church, and part of maybe your value of being here is you love that 20-second conversation with Rex, and that's okay. And then there's what he calls public relationships. And it's not lost on me that our times make this tricky, but his argument is public relationships are those with people that will never know their name. Oftentimes it's at a concert or a game or at church or something along those lines, a show, a theatrical performance. And the point isn't the people you're there with. The point is to experience the thing in front of you together. And actually what he says is for every 1 intimate relationship, you need 2 personal, 4 social, and 8 public. I feel like I might have put out a lot of information there, but here's really where I'm trying to lead you. What if this is a season that's inviting you to reassess the value of people over against the value of Facebook or Netflix or any of the other things that might cause you to go like, yeah, I'm tired, I'm just going to do that? What if the opportunity of this season is an opportunity of connection? We're going to dig in more. I want to end with Romans 16. If you're not familiar with the text, Romans is written by a guy named Paul, who's at the very least the most famous follower of Jesus. And Paul wrote a good portion of the New Testament. He was eventually killed at the hands of Rome, but he wrote this very long letter that we call Romans. And I want to just read the last chapter. I don't think this is the chapter I always skip when I read through the book. But somehow in this season, it's meant something different to me, and I think you'll pick up what I mean by it. Starting in verse 1, I commend, and I didn't put the words up there because I have no idea to pronounce the names, but it's easier for me to pretend if you don't see them too. I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a deacon of the church at Cenchreae, so that you may welcome her in the Lord as is fitting for the saints and help her in whatever she may require from you. For she has been a benefactor of many and of myself as well. Greet Priscilla and Aquila, who work with me in Christ Jesus and who risk their necks for my life, to whom not only I give thanks, but also all the churches of the Gentiles. Greet also the church in their house. Greet my beloved Epaphroditus, who was the first convert in Asia for Christ. Greet Mary, who has worked very hard among you. Greet Andronicus and Junia, my relatives, who were in prison with me. They were prominent among the apostles, and they were in Christ Jesus before I was. Greet Amphilius, my beloved in the Lord. Greet Urbanus, our co-worker in Christ, and my beloved Statius. Greet Apelles, who is approved in Christ. Greet those who belong to the family of Aristobulus. Greet my relative Herodian. Greet those in the Lord who belong to the family of Narcissus. Greet those workers in the Lord, Tryphania and Tryphosa. Greet the beloved Persis, who has worked hard in the Lord. Greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, and greet his mother, a mother to me also. Greet Astronicus, Phlegon, Hermes, Parabolus, Hermas, and the brothers and sisters who are with them. Greet Philologus, Julia, Nersius, and his sister, and Olympus, and all the saints who are with them. Greet one another with a holy kiss. All the churches of Christ greet you. What if following Jesus, and not just following Jesus, being human, was always something that was intended to be done together? And what if the rebirth of post-COVID life is this rediscovery of the value of connection with people? And what if to do so, whether we're talking about God in those instances or not, is in the truest sense divine? What if the happiest people you know are those who are tired, and yet they do things tired with other people? I'd like to pray, give you a chance to process through a song. God, Lord, my prayer here would be that this would be received not in a moralistic, kind of right or wrong, black or white, good or bad kind of way, but an invitational way. That God, as we look at our life and look at the joys and the pains, we look at the griefs and the opportunities, God, I pray that you would invite us into conversation about the value of people, about one another, about experiences together over stuff, about face-to-face meals over a table, over screens. God, that we wouldn't create a kind of new shaming moralism, but just rediscover in the truest sense what these ancient people understood about what it means to be human. And God, we know that it's not just these people who understood this, and yet we're so grateful for the long narrative given to us, a story about who you really are and what it really means to be human. Amen.
If you would like to learn more about Narrate Church, find us at narratechurch.org or look us up on Facebook and Instagram.